Here's this week's PYFA Devotional. We hope that you find it encouraging and inspiring.
Hello, my name is Relvin Abraham, and I attend Little Flock Pentecostal Church. Today I want to share with you a devotional that I hope inspires you. As we've been in this COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing around us in our world a lot of confusion, a lot of loss. People are experiencing different degrees of disarray in their lives that they're not used to. Some people have lost their income, some have lost loved ones, and a lot of us have lost just a general sense of connection with other people. But as this curve starts to flatten, we're also seeing glimpses of hope and a turn toward restoration as a nation and as individuals. And as we enter the season of restoration, I thought we could look to the book and story of Nehemiah and see how he responds to a call for restoration in his time. In chapter 1 of Nehemiah, we encounter a Jerusalem that has been shattered and in brokenness for quite some time. The Babylonians had conquered Jerusalem, pretty much destroyed it, and several Jews had fled Jerusalem in exile. Some had come back but were living in poor conditions. So we also meet Nehemiah, a cupbearer to the king of Susa, who's also a Jew. He is visited by a couple of his friends, and he asks how it's going in Jerusalem. And this is their response. Verse 3 of Nehemiah chapter 1 says, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." So there's three key things that Nehemiah does that I believe we can copy. The first one is he asks. He cares enough to ask what is going on in the city of Jerusalem and his people, the Jews. So he doesn't take this opportunity, this visit from his friends, to share the story of how he became cupbearer to the king. Instead, he makes it not about himself, but he asks about his people. He cares enough to know how his people are doing, even though he's not affected by it. What if we were to go beyond the simple, how are you, and what's going on, and ask more inquisitive questions, such as, what is the first thing you want to do when you come out of quarantine? What was the highlight of your week? Or how can I be praying for you? You'll be surprised what people have to say when we ask more inquisitive questions that really show that we care. The second thing Nehemiah does is he knocks. He knocks at the door of heaven and asks for forgiveness for his people and for his homeland. Chapter 1, verse 4, Nehemiah says, "When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." For whom is it that God is inviting you to intercede for? Who in your life could use you uplifting them in prayer? As you consider this, there's also a couple things that we can all be praying for in this season. We could pray for our nation to be restored as a whole. We could pray for protection for those who are battling the disease on the front lines. We could pray for comfort for those who are experiencing grief and loss. We can pray for health for those who are sick. And the next thing that Nehemiah does is he acts. He doesn't just sit there with this information that he hears, but he takes action. He goes to the king and asks permission to go and rebuild this wall. God uniquely positioned him to be in a place of favor with the king so that his will could be accomplished. So the rebuilding starts. And Nehemiah describes how this building starts and how different people take roles in this rebuilding. Verse 28 and 29 mention this. Each person were building where they were placed. The priests made repairs, each in front of his own house. Next to them, Zadok, son of Immer, made repairs opposite his house. So each person did what they could, where they could. As Nehemiah was positioned in a place of favor in front of the king, we can ask ourselves where God has positioned us uniquely to accomplish God's will. Maybe some of us are blessed financially, and we can afford to care for and bless other people financially with some of what God has given us. Some of us may be blessed with organization and be really good at paperwork. There are some people who have to fill out unemployment applications at the time, but are not even sure where to start. Maybe you can step in and fill in the gap there. Others may just be too busy dealing with the crisis to worry about providing meals. If you're blessed in the kitchen, maybe you can provide a meal for a family that could really use one at this time. I want to ask you to prayerfully consider today, how is God inviting you, and how has God uniquely positioned you to ask, to knock, and to act? God bless you.
Thank you for listening to that amazing devotional. I just couldn't help but think how the Holy Spirit amazingly put leadership as a recurring theme for PYFA this week. Relvin was talking about Nehemiah. He is such a classic example of somebody who became a leader not by his exceptional great talent, but just because he was willing to step up when no one else was. I'm sure when he was faithfully obeying the call of God, he wasn't thinking about the impact he will leave behind. But today, thousands of years later, we are still impacted and encouraged by his ministry. This week, we also celebrated the life of another man of God who went on the other side of eternity, but who spent his entire adult life inspiring others to stand and defend the truth of God. Ravi Zacharias' life may have ended, but his story and ministry will continue to inspire thousands and maybe even millions of men and women of God. This week, we saw a contemporary example of how a leader who grew up in PYFA is making a difference to his church and his community, Pastor Cecil Matthew. In Conversation Corner, which happened this Friday at 6 p.m., Pastor Daniel John and Nina Thomas had this amazing interaction with him where he shares his experience and the lessons that he learned in leadership and ministry. If you haven't checked it out, please check it and it'll be a blessing to you. It's on Facebook on PYFA's page. Relvin was also mentioning about how to use whatever you have to be a blessing. If you think that you can be a financial blessing to others, please consider the PYFA Relief Fund. The purpose of this fund is only to meet the genuine and verifiable needs of the people in our community that have been severely financially affected by this COVID-19 crisis. Let us continue to hold each other in prayers as we will victoriously come out of this together, and that God will prepare us to meet the needs and challenges of this post-COVID-19 new normal world that we will be stepping into. Remember, we are all in this together. God is in control. God bless you.